You people always want handouts. Jim Jordan's words crack through Congress like a whip. Live to millions. Jasmine Crockett rose, clutching a 40-year-old battlefield photo of her grandmother saving a soldier's life. The chamber held its breath. What would she unleash that could shatter him in front of the nation? The Washington sky hung low and gray that morning, like the city itself was holding its breath. Jasmine Crockett stood at her apartment window, coffee warming her hands, eyes fixed on the Capitol dome in the distance. Today's hearing on federal funding for urban aid had been circled on her calendar for weeks, and she could already feel the weight of it pressing in. On her kitchen counter sat a thick folder filled with numbers, stories, and the names of people she carried into that chamber with her. Mothers working 2 jobs and still falling short. Veterans denied the health care they earned. Children trying to learn in buildings older than their grandparents. They weren't just talking points. They were her reason for showing up. She already knew who would be waiting to challenge her. Jim Jordan didn't come to debate. He came to dismantle. His attacks were never just on policy. They were aimed at the person, sharp enough to leave a mark. She had seen him do it before, and she knew he'd try again today. Pulling on her Navy suit, Jasmine pinned a small gold brooch to her lapel. A gift from her grandmother. It wasn't for style. It was a reminder of the woman who taught her that holding your ground was more than an act. It was a duty. Outside the Capitol, the air crackled with the sound of camera shutters. Reporters' voices cut through the noise. "Are you ready for Jordan? Will you compromise?" She kept moving, heels hitting the marble steps like a drum beat. She wasn't here to compromise. She was here to fight. And the only question was, how far would he go? The Washington sky hung low and gray that morning, like the city itself was holding its breath. Jasmine Crockett stood at her apartment window, coffee warming her hands, eyes fixed on the Capitol dome in the distance. Today's hearing on federal funding for urban aid had been circled on her calendar for weeks, and she could already feel the weight of it pressing in. On her kitchen counter sat a thick folder filled with numbers, stories, and the names of people she carried into that chamber with her. Mothers working 2 jobs and still falling short. Veterans denied the health care they earned. Children trying to learn in buildings older than their grandparents. They weren't just talking points. They were her reason for showing up. She already knew who would be waiting to challenge her. Jim Jordan didn't come to debate. He came to dismantle. His attacks were never just on policy. They were aimed at the person, sharp enough to leave a mark. She had seen him do it before, and she knew he'd try again today. Pulling on her Navy suit, Jasmine pinned a small gold brooch to her lapel. A gift from her grandmother. It wasn't for style. It was a reminder of the woman who taught her that holding your ground was more than an act. It was a duty. Outside the Capitol, the air crackled with the sound of camera shutters. Reporters' voices cut through the noise. "Are you ready for Jordan? Will you compromise?" She kept moving, heels hitting the marble steps like a drum beat. She wasn't here to compromise. She was here to fight. And the only question was, how far would he go? Jasmine leaned into the microphone, voice steady as she laid out the facts. Numbers on school closures, families losing health care, neighborhoods left behind. She wasn't reading from a page. She was speaking from memory, from people she'd met face to face. The room was quiet enough to hear the faint scratch of a pen in the press gallery. Then Jordan leaned forward, cutting across her mid-sentence. His voice was sharp, loud enough to rattle the microphones. "Duh, you people always want handouts." The sound didn't just hit her ears. It went straight for the roots of her family's history. It hit the room like a dropped grenade. Gasps broke out from the audience. A teacher in the second row shook her head, a veteran's jaw clenched tight. The cameras caught every reaction, zooming in on Jordan's unflinching face, then snapping to Jasmine. Son, her eyes stayed on him, but her fingers tightened around the edge of her folder until her knuckles went white. Inside, her pulse hammered, but her expression didn't crack. She'd been in fights before, but this was different. This wasn't just about policy. This was about erasing who she was and the people she represented. Across the room, Maxwell Frost shifted forward in his seat, ready to back her if she spoke. Marjorie Taylor Greene smirked like she'd been waiting for that line all morning. The audience seemed to lean in, sensing that the air had changed. Jasmine drew in one slow breath. Every camera in the chamber was now fixed on her, broadcasting live into living rooms across America. What do you do when the whole country hears an insult meant to erase you? The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She just stared at Jordan, the noise of the room fading until all she could hear was her late grandmother's voice. Calm, unshakable. Hold your ground. Every eye in the chamber was on her. The audience stopped shifting in their seats. Reporters froze mid-note. Even the clicking of camera shutters slowed, as if everyone was waiting for her to break. Jordan leaned back in his chair, a small grin tugging at his mouth. He thought he'd cornered her, thought the insult had landed and there was no way out. He settled into the kind of silence that dares you to fill it, the silence of someone convinced they've already won. In the second row, a veteran in a dark blazer shook his head, his jaw tight with disgust. He'd seen that tone before. Not in politics, but in boot camps and battlefields, where words were used to strip someone down. Jasmine's fingers loosened their grip on the folder. She inhaled slowly, letting the moment stretch. From the gallery, a chair creaked as someone leaned forward. A faint cough echoed in the stillness. A reporter's pen froze mid-word. If she snapped now, it would look like anger. But if she waited, if she let the tension build, it could turn into something else entirely. The seconds dragged, heavy and deliberate. Somewhere in the second row, a veteran's boot tapped twice against the floor before going still. It wasn't weakness that kept her quiet. It was control. And control was a weapon Jordan didn't expect her to have. The room didn't know it yet, but this wasn't retreat. It was the first step in setting up a blow they'd never forget. Jasmine didn't rush. She slid her hand into the folder with the care of someone handling something sacred. Her fingers found the worn edges of a black and white photo. 40 years old, the paper soft from time. She placed it on the table for just a moment, her thumb brushing over the image, as if drawing strength from it. Then she lifted it into the light, turning it so the cameras could see. Her grandmother, a nurse in 1968, was kneeling in the dirt beside a wounded American soldier. Blood on his uniform. Determination in her eyes. The kind of moment that didn't just happen. It defined who you were. Her voice cut through the silence, low but steady. The only handouts in my family were the ones that saved American lives. A murmur rolled through the room. A teacher in the gallery nodded slowly. From the back, someone whispered, "Amen." The veteran in the second row straightened in his seat, eyes locked on the photo like it belonged to his own past. In the press gallery, reporters' pens started scratching faster. Across the country, televisions replayed the image, anchors cutting in with breaking news banners. On Twitter, the hashtag handouts that save lives began to climb. First in local feeds, then across the nation. Jordan shifted in his chair, but said nothing. The insult that had landed like a punch minutes ago now felt small, swallowed by something bigger. Jasmine lowered the photo but didn't put it away. She kept it in front of her, a silent reminder to everyone in the room, and everyone watching, that this fight wasn't about her pride. It was about legacy. How do you turn one image into a movement? Jordan gave a short, dry laugh, the kind meant to brush something off, but it didn't land. The sound was thin, out of place, and the cameras caught it. Across the table, a fellow Republican shifted in his seat, eyes darting to the audience like he wanted no part of what just happened. Maxwell Frost leaned toward Jasmine, his voice low but full of pride. "That's how you do it." Something in the room had changed. The tension that had been pressing in was now pushing outward. Against Jordan, against his words. Jasmine wasn't just parrying an insult anymore. She was rewriting the frame of the conversation. The focus wasn't on handouts now. It was on sacrifice, service, and who really deserved the title of public servant. In the gallery, people started leaning forward instead of back. Teachers exchanged glances. A veteran nodded slowly, almost like he'd just seen someone win a fight without throwing a punch. Even the reporters were writing faster, sensing this wasn't a fleeting moment. It was the kind that would make the evening news, maybe even the history books. Jordan's smirk was gone. His pen tapped against the desk, quick and uneven. He cleared his throat like he might speak, but stopped. For the first time that morning, he wasn't in control of the room. Jasmine didn't push the advantage. Not yet. She let the silence work for her, knowing the momentum had shifted. What happens when you have the truth on your side, but the fight isn't over? Jordan straightened in his seat, flipping through a stack of papers like a man about to reload. His voice came sharp, numbers rolling off his tongue. Claims of welfare abuse, charts supposedly showing fraud and waste. He spoke fast, each word aimed to bury Jasmine under a landslide of statistics. But she didn't flinch. When he finished, she leaned in, her tone calm but edged with steel. "Congressman, let's talk about numbers. Last year alone, this chamber approved billions in tax breaks for corporations that move jobs overseas, including some in your own state." She slid a printed report across the table toward him. "And the price tag? 3 times what we spend on urban aid." The room shifted again. A low murmur spread through the gallery. Marjorie Taylor Greene rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. From the second row, a teacher shook her head and muttered just loud enough for the cameras to catch it. "Shame." Jordan opened his mouth to fire back, but Jasmine was already moving. She cited sources, dates, voting records. Every claim backed up, every number tied to a human cost. Closed factories, empty storefronts, families forced to leave their hometowns. This wasn't about her anymore. The fight had moved to something bigger. Who this government truly serves, and who gets left behind. The audience wasn't just watching a sparring match. They were watching someone drag the debate out of the shadows and into the light. Jordan's jaw tightened. The tapping pen returned, faster this time. He knew he couldn't challenge her facts without opening himself up even more. Can facts alone win a fight fueled by prejudice? Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She leaned in, eyes locked on Jordan, her tone deliberate. "Last year, you voted for a $12 billion corporate tax break that sent American jobs overseas. That's the real handout." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then the sound came. A sharp collective intake of breath, followed by a low ripple of voices. Reporters in the press gallery lurched forward, pens scratching, cameras snapping like gunfire. Jordan's face flushed, the color creeping from his collar upward. His jaw moved, but no words came out. Across the aisle, a Republican colleague shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly fascinated by the papers in front of him. The audience reacted first. A veteran clapped once, loud and defiant, breaking the silence. Others followed. Teachers, activists, even a few scattered suits in the back. The applause grew, rolling through the chamber like a wave that couldn't be stopped. Jordan's smirk was gone. He gripped his pen so tightly it looked like it might snap. Cameras caught every twitch, every blink, every tell of a man who'd been hit exactly where it hurt. In the record, in the votes, in the numbers that didn't lie. Durham. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't need to gloat. She sat back slightly, letting the moment breathe, letting the applause do the work for her. Every clap, every murmur was another nail in the coffin of the argument he thought he owned. The tension in the room was no longer about whether she could hold her own. It was about what he would do now that she'd called him out in front of the nation. When the mask slips, what will desperation make your opponent do? Jordan's pen hit the desk with a sharp crack. "This is nothing but grandstanding for the cameras," he snapped, his voice cutting through the lingering applause. He leaned forward, trying to reclaim the space between them, his words quick and jagged, like he was throwing punches. Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned in just far enough so he could see the steadiness in her eyes. "No, Congressman, I'm standing for the people who sent me here." Her tone was low, measured. The kind that hits harder than any shout. For a split second, Jordan looked like he might fire back, but the moderator's gavel slammed down, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Order! Order!" The command did little to settle the air. Voices in the audience overlapped. Some clapping again, others calling out. A teacher shouted, "Let her speak," and someone else added, "That's our voice." Marjorie Taylor Greene shook her head, muttering something to Jordan, but his focus stayed locked on Jasmine. His jaw worked, the muscles twitching, his eyes narrowing like he was calculating his next strike. The heat in the room was rising, not from the lights, but from the collision of pride, truth, and political survival. Jasmine sat back slowly, still holding his gaze, her hand resting on that worn gold pin at her lapel. Around them, the noise of the chamber felt almost like a storm. Every clap, every murmur a gust pushing the balance of power just a little further in her direction. The gloves were off now, and everyone in the room could feel it. The real question wasn't who would speak next. It was who was truly ready for the fight. The gavel strikes were still fading when the first voice rang out from the gallery. "We're with you, Congresswoman!" A veteran in a dark blazer stood, chest out, hand raised in salute. His voice cracked, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. 2 rows behind him, a group of teachers rose to their feet, clapping hard enough to drown out the restless murmurs. Their applause spread like wildfire. Veterans joining in, activists on their feet, hands pounding together in rhythm. The cameras caught it all. One lens lingered on a woman in the front row. Silver hair pulled back, a small American flag pin on her collar. She pressed a tissue to her eyes, the tears slipping free as she stared at Jasmine. She was a Vietnam vet's wife, and in that moment, it was clear the photo on Jasmine's desk wasn't just her family's history, it was theirs too. Outside the chamber, the story was already exploding. CNN and Fox News ran a split screen. Jasmine's grandmother in that black and white photo on one side, Jordan's "You people always want handouts" on the other. The contrast was brutal, and it was everywhere. On Twitter, the hashtag "handouts that save lives" surged past 1 million mentions. Facebook feeds lit up with veterans posting their own photos from the war, each one captioned with the same phrase, "We remember." Jasmine didn't need to look at Jordan to know the shift had happened. The loudest voice in the room wasn't his anymore. What happens when public opinion becomes the loudest voice in the room? Jordan cleared his throat and shuffled his papers like the noise alone could reset the room. "Let's return to the agenda," he said, his voice tighter now, words clipped. He tried to pivot to budget efficiency, to talk about responsible spending, but every sentence felt rushed, uneven. The flush in his face hadn't faded. Jasmine sat still, letting him speak, her expression calm but unyielding. When it was her turn, she didn't waste a second. "Responsible spending," she said evenly, "means investing in the people who build this country, not abandoning them." Her tone carried no tremor, only steel, The contrast was glaring. His stumbles against her measured precision. The press gallery noticed. A reporter whispered to another, "It's David versus Goliath in the Capitol," and the phrase began to echo in newsrooms beyond the chamber. Jordan tried to cut in again, but this time his words overlapped hers, and the moderator snapped, "Let her finish." A ripple of applause broke out from the gallery before fading into a tense hush. Tak. Jasmine kept her focus on the facts, but every fact was wrapped in a story. A family forced to move after a factory closure. A veteran denied care because of budget cuts. Each example drew a deeper line between her cause and his record. Jordan leaned back, jaw clenched, eyes darting to his notes as if the answers might be hiding there. He was no longer leading the hearing. He was surviving it. Will he back down or double down? Jordan leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "You'll never change how Washington works," he said, every word meant to land like a final blow. His eyes locked on hers, daring her to respond, certain he'd have the last word. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned in just far enough so the microphones would catch every syllable. "Watch me." The chamber went still. No murmurs, no shuffling papers, no camera clicks. Just a heavy silence that seemed to stretch forever. Even Jordan's smirk faltered for a split second. The moderator's gavel came down hard. "This hearing is adjourned." The crack of wood against wood echoed like the closing of a door. Jasmine sat back, her gaze still fixed on Jordan, as if to remind him that adjournment didn't mean the fight was over. Around them, the audience began to move, but the mood lingered. Charged, unshaken. Veterans clasped each other's shoulders. Teachers whispered her name. Reporters moved fast, microphones out, already framing their headlines. Jordan gathered his papers in short, jerky motions, not looking her way. He was the first to leave, but in politics, everyone knew. The one who walks out first isn't always the one who's ahead. Jasmine stood, her gold pin catching the overhead lights, and the cameras surged toward her. This moment, sharp and unpolished, was the kind that would play on loop across the country before the day was done. What happens when the cameras stop, but the story keeps going? The heavy wooden doors of the chamber swung open, and the hallway outside erupted. Reporters surged forward, microphones and cameras raised like weapons. The air was thick with shouted questions. "Congresswoman, was that planned? What do you say to Jordan's supporters?" But Jasmine didn't break stride. She stopped just long enough to give a short, measured statement. "Today was about truth, and I'll keep showing up for the people who need it most. No spin, no theatrics. Just steady conviction." Then she moved on, her staff forming a moving wall around her. Down the hall, Jordan took the opposite route, ducking into a narrow side corridor. He kept his eyes down, ignoring the cameras that caught only his retreating back. No comment, no last jab, just silence. By the time Jasmine reached her office, the world outside had already caught fire. On Twitter, the clip of her holding up the black and white photo had passed 1 million views. On Instagram, veterans were posting side-by-side shots of the moment with their own wartime pictures, all tagged handouts that save lives. Facebook timelines were flooded with shares from people who rarely posted about politics at all. Her phone buzzed with messages. Some from colleagues, others from strangers who simply wrote, "Thank you for saying what needed to be said." She set the photo gently on her desk, the same way she had in the chamber, and for the first time that day, she exhaled. The fight in the room was over. But would the moment become a movement? Hundreds of miles from Washington, in a small Ohio living room, a retired factory worker sat in his worn recliner, eyes fixed on the TV. He watched Jasmine lift that faded photo, heard her words cut through the noise, and nodded slowly. "That's what fighting for people looks like," he murmured to no one in particular. In a Louisiana community hall still marked by water stains from Hurricane Katrina, survivors crowded around a flickering projector screen. The moment played again. Jordan's insult, Jasmine's pause, the reveal of the photo. A woman in the front row whispered, "She's talking about us," and the whole room hummed in agreement. Across the country, radio stations lit up. Callers told their own versions of handouts that saved lives. A stranger who pulled them from floodwaters, a neighbor who shared food after a plant shut down, a nurse who stayed past her shift during the pandemic. The phrase was no longer just Jasmine's. It was a shared language for survival and dignity. On social media, the hashtag climbed higher. Veterans, single parents, first responders, people who rarely agreed on anything, were posting under the same banner. News outlets scrambled to keep up, running split screens of Jasmine in the hearing and the stories flooding in from ordinary Americans. The clip had left the Capitol and entered living rooms, diners, and break rooms. It was no longer just a moment in politics. It was something people were carrying into their own conversations. But can one stand in Congress inspire real change outside its walls? The lights in the studio were warm, but Jasmine's voice carried the same steady weight it had in the hearing room. The interviewer leaned in with the final question. What did this moment mean to her? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Justice isn't charity. It's the debt we owe to one another as Americans. The words hung in the air, as sharp and clear as the gavel's strike days earlier. The clip cut to a montage that needed no narration. A Vietnam veteran holding a faded photo of his platoon. A teacher standing in an empty classroom, holding a worn math textbook given by a neighboring school. A hurricane survivor clutching the life vest a stranger had thrown her in floodwaters. Each image appeared with the same bold caption, handouts that save lives. Teachers, activists, first responders. Ordinary people in kitchens, on porches, in union halls, all holding up their own proof that a handout, in the truest sense, was an act of solidarity, not weakness. Their eyes carried the same quiet defiance Jasmine had shown on the house floor. The music swelled, and the screen faded to black. White text appeared, stark against the silence. What's your story? Share it. The fight's not over. Then came the final beat. Jasmine's voice, not polished for TV, but raw and human. Tell it. Someone out there needs to hear it. The moment that started in a Capitol hearing room had become something bigger. An invitation. Not just to watch, not just to applaud, but to join. And for the viewers sitting in living rooms across America, the question now was no longer about Jasmine. It was about themselves. Sometimes, a single act of courage and an undeniable truth is enough to move an entire nation. We can always stand to protect our values and our memories, so future generations understand that dignity is never up for negotiation. If that moment came to you, would you let your story remain silent, or let it become a flame that warms and lights the way for others? If this moment struck a chord, don't just keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to First Shock, where truth stands tall and dignity is never for sale. Tap the bell, because the next stand could be yours. Which part of Jasmine's fight will you remember tomorrow? Tell us in the comments. Your story might be the spark someone else needs. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.